And you guys should, I'll ask you guys questions, but if there's something
you already said all the streaming stuff, or
feel free to say, hey, this is really interesting.
You already said about like the streaming and everything, or do I have to do that?
I'm going to start us off, as I showed you with the questions I sent, like talking about kind of your motivation and vision for the work, and I also added a question about.
Is this a pre-record or is this
No, this is a live show.
All right.
Kind of our
what you're
ideas about
doing
poverty in
is
this country are sort of based on a lot of myths. So like people,
you're shutting off this.
individual
You
people's
say
fault,
stop,
and the idea that people should pull
and
themselves
then you
up
gotta
by
come
their
over
bootstraps
here
kind
and
of
play
thing
her
versus
music.
like the policies
And then do I
and
put it
systems
back?
that have
Or
put
do I
poverty and racial inequity
No, 'cause
racism in place, and
once you're
how
doing
you
her
think
intro,
about changing that or changing
and
the
she
story
starts
that we tell
talking, you're
about
bringing
that
her
as
down
part
to
of
like
the
10,
community building as
and
part
let
of the
let
policy
her
change.
introduce her show and everything, and then you just
And then I really
bring
want
it
to
down
also
completely.
like
You want me
open
to do
up this for you guys to share, like
Want me to
how
start
does this feel to you? Like
Uh,
living in this,
yeah,
doing this
I mean,
work, like
I still want to
you know,
start,
so
like
I'm
you said,
interested,
it's
like a
one
lot
thing
of what I
like,
try to talk to people about on
but I
the
can
show
work
is not
towards
just
it.
like what's your organizing tactic, what are the issues, like we will definitely talk about that, but also sharing kind of how does this feel to you? Like how does this impact your life? And then also like what are you hoping, you know, when I said like what's your vision, what are you hoping for? Like for real, like if this was achieved, like how do you want your lives to be different? How do you want your society to be different?
whenever you're ready,
Feel
Tagan.
free to kind of get into other parts of it, not just like your community organizing campaigns. Whenever I'm ready, you're going to start the music?
Yeah, you ready?
I'm ready. This is really loud. Am I on the wrong headphones on? Doesn't matter which ones.
This controls volume all the way on the left.
Should be other headphones.
Yeah. You definitely want to hear yourself because then you might be too low.
You can adjust. These are the volume here.
So it's going to announce at some point the library rally in the Bridgeport Police Accountability meeting. You have any meetings you want to announce?
You're listening to WNHH Community Radio 103.5 FM. Welcome to the Table Underground. I'm your host, Tagan Engel, and we're digging deep into stories of food, race, radical love, and healing social justice. Today's show is Organizing for Freedom. Our guests are Issa Mujahid and Kamel Scott Mujahid. They're the husband and wife team behind CT Core Organize Now, a grassroots organization based in Connecticut. The goal of CT Core Organize Now is to build anti-racist community and to co-create a movement for greater racial equity in our state. They are training a network of grassroots leaders and doing policy work focused on dismantling institutionalized racism and inequity in Connecticut. CT Core has 4 racial justice issues as their focus: criminal justice reform, education equity, economic justice, and environmental justice/health equity. I invited them here today to share their insights on the importance of community building and how we can transform the racial and economic divisions in our state and our society. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. Can you guys hear them? All right. Later in our conversation, I want to hear about the specific organizing work and campaigns that you're both leading. But to start us off, I'd like to learn a little bit about what led you both into the work that you're doing and the way that you do it. So I'm wondering if you can share some of the experiences or the people in your lives that have inspired you to do the work that you do in the way that you do.
So for me, it really started with my family, my parents, my grandparents. At a really early age, my grandmother would literally sit me at her knee or at her foot in her living room and tell me about our history, tell me about Black oppression in this country, the struggle for Black liberation in this country, the roles that they played in trying to make life a little bit better for their children and grandchildren, and also the duty that I had to continue that work. And that's just something that, to me, is just still a vivid part of my childhood. It's something that I've always carried, not something I always fully understood how it would manifest, but something that I knew was really essential to my purpose. And And over the years, as I kind of grew to understand and step into my own identity as a person, as a Black man, as a Muslim, as a community leader, the picture started to come in a bit more into focus about, you know, how I was gonna step into that role as far as carrying the work. And a big part of that picture coming into focus was meeting and marrying Kamel, who, you know, I was really attracted to in the beginning because of a similar worldview that she shared. And over the years, through our relationship, really thinking about the work and our responsibility to carry this work forward, together we were able to think about, like, specifically how we want to show up in this work.
Yeah, I share some of that, obviously. I would say my motivation really also came from my life experience growing up as, you know, in a poor Black family on the border. And
On the border,
on the border in El Paso, Texas.
Okay.
And just, you know, one issue that I'm particularly passionate about is ending the drug war. And that is something that had a huge impact on my life and my childhood, on my family. Has, you know, brought incredible destruction to my family in terms of the, you know, the lives of people who were affected by it, being taken out of the home, being put into mass incarceration systems, the impact of not having a health infrastructure for addiction that would, you know, supported people in getting off of drugs and being able to support their families. And then on top of that, just an incredible extraction of wealth from a family, you know, our family, which had gone through a generation of, had over a generation through actually serving in the military, been able to get into the middle class, and then in the blink of an eye, that wealth being stripped away, and incredible destruction coming on the family. So
wealth being stripped away by what?
I would say, like, you know, combination of, you know, just the way that systems impact families around the drug war. So when you know, for example, recently when a family member was incarcerated, that person, I think, had some savings tucked away. They were also living on Social Security. So this is someone who had a close family member who had been struggling with drug addiction for a really long time, and who was on Social Security, had that taken away because they were incarcerated. And then within the system, you know, especially because this person struggled with diabetes, needed to have certain, you know, food items sent that the prison wasn't necessarily meeting those dietary needs, the cost of phone calls, the cost of just being in contact and supporting people through that period. And then just travel, you know, because this person was in El Paso and then was moved to a facility in Gatesville, which is the other side of Texas. And you know, most people know Texas is an enormous state, so we're talking clean other side of the state. And then moved to Odessa, and then having to find their own way back from there, back home to El Paso. So just the amount of money that just evaporated.
Right. Most people don't think about this stuff. They don't know that it costs a fortune to call your family out of prison. They don't think about bail and all these other things that cost money, that prisons don't actually take care of people's health care needs.
Right.
People don't realize that. And that really, it all started with an addiction issue.
Right. And we're talking about an elderly person who is in a wheelchair, not a violent, not a threat to anybody, who has never been violent. But the way that the system works, that's the system that's there to catch people when they fall into the depths of addiction. So that's something I personally felt really passionate about. And then, you know, some years ago, almost 14 years ago, I came up to New Haven to go to Yale, and that was a shock, and also quite something that really pushed me in terms of my understanding of inequality and my commitment to working on those issues, just to see the poverty and you know, struggle that I grew up in, juxtaposed with this incredible wealth and privilege and power, and just realizing, you know, these were young people who had access to wealth and power that the adults in my family would never dream of, and who I watched sometimes daily throwing it down the drain, just wasting it, and the incredible amount of drug use that went on that campus, and serious drug use that went on, and abuse that was never.
Nobody ever ended up
in jail. If somebody reached that limit, then there was a system there to catch them that was gentle and that cared about their humanity.
Okay.
So being exposed to that I'll say that was like the beginning of my rage, personally, just getting really angry that so many people were able to have wealth, waste it, have wealth beyond what they could possibly need, and so many other people were struggling,
Right.
suffering, and dying. So yeah.
I can totally relate to that. Growing up, I mean, obviously not exactly your story, but growing up in New Haven in the height of the crack epidemic of the late 80s and early 90s, and then I went to Sarah Lawrence College, which was a private college, not to the level of Yale, but I had never understood what wealth was until I went there, or what privilege. Obviously, I have privilege as a white person, and I felt that growing up here very much. But when I went to a private college, it totally blew my mind about the difference between what was going on where I came from and what was going on in some other parts of the world. So
I think that's the case for a lot of people. College can be a really eye-opening experience in that regard.
Yeah. So it sounds like both of you have these very personal experiences, both with people who were working for civil rights and teaching you about that, and then also these experiences that taught you, probably in many ways you didn't just share, about the injustices. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what the vision that you have is right now about what you're trying to build.
Do you want to add to that?
You start.
Okay. So I think our vision for what we want to build is multifold, but ultimately we want to build a movement in the state to dismantle systemic racism and inequity in the state, and our method for that actually brings a lot more things that we want to build. So it's building is actually a kind of a strategy of ours, I would say. So so we're building community, we're building relationships, and also we think it's important to also engage in building strong Black-led and people of color-led institutions in different parts of our state that can actually hold communities down.
Yeah. So Kamal and I, we met through organizing and activism, and I've been organizing since I returned home from the Army in the early 2000s in various parts of the state. And over the years, I've seen some gaps in organizing and advocacy in Connecticut. Posing a question to myself over the years. Well, we're in this, supposedly progressive state, but we have some of the largest systemic inequities in the country, around wealth, around achievement, highly disproportionate rates of incarceration. And, I started to identify some gaps that if we could fill those, could possibly help the organizing be more impactful. And some of those things are what we're trying to build. Infrastructure is a better organizing infrastructure. And so CT Core is building a statewide network in order to help facilitate the movement building. Kamel just mentioned. We're also now in our second year establishing local chapters around the state to build local power, political power across the state in a number of districts in order to move a Black, a POC agenda.
POC being
people of color, for sure. And also facilitating the creation of that agenda. And so since January, we've been meeting with folks from around the state to develop a racial justice platform. And that's a process that we're gonna carry out through to the end of the summer, and then share it with the public in the fall.
So when you were talking about gaps, it sounds like the gaps that you're saying was leadership by Black people and people of color, and an agenda that actually reflects what communities of color are saying they need. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, and then the infrastructure to move that agenda forward. And so
the organizing infrastructure, like the people behind it to push. the agenda? Is that what you mean?
So
or other things?
the network's the ability to mobilize people, the way to coordinate organizing strategies in order to kind of to move the agenda, to plan and strategize collectively. These things I've seen them happen as different kind of issues pop up, but then what often, I apologize, I'm still not hearing in my headphones, so that might be contributing to it. Yeah, it's better. All right,
Can you hear it now?
Yeah, there you go.
All right.
Okay. So, yeah, so, different issues would come up. I've been in, a number of coalitions, and we've worked together, strategized together, mobilized together around the state in a coordinated way to pass a specific policy piece. But then kind of once that happened or didn't happen, that kind of coalition would dissipate. The relationships will still be there, and they kind of reconvene for another issue. But it's important to have that sustained organizing infrastructure where we're consistently strategizing together, community building together, training together, in order to create and move an agenda.
Right. And can you say, just for people who maybe haven't thought about this in quite this way before, do those systems and supports exist for issues and things that are typically more led by white people?
So it's funny when I so CC Core was founded last January, so we're like a year and a half old right now. And so the original thinking from the very beginning was to create an organizing network, but also to be able to build grassroots power, but with a statewide reach. And so building up and local leadership in Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. With the network piece, I think my original thinking was, well, just organizing in general needs more infrastructure, so social justice organizing at large. As the work started to unfold and the need for more support for POC-led work and the POC-led agenda became even clearer than it was to me at that point. It was pretty clear to me at that point, but actually once we started to dive into it, I was like, wow, there are a lot of obstacles to Black leadership in this work. The network itself became a more POC racial justice focus as well. So I think, there are some supports for white-led organizing. I think white-led organizations have access to a lot of resources, but I think organizing in general in Connecticut needs more coordinated infrastructure. And I think the white-led progressive organizing needs more racial justice centering itself.
Right.
They're doing great work, and I've been and continue to be involved in a lot of broader social justice campaigns, but without a racial justice centering.
They'll never be really addressing some of those
equity
root issues.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot over the past bunch of years. We usually talk about racism like about a black-white issue, but really, and we tend not to use the word white supremacy, but because it triggers just KKK, right, when we say that. But if you think about racism as white supremacy, like our country is set up to be supporting white-led businesses, white-led organizations and communities. Like we have policies that have been put in place. You never think of those policies as like KKK kind of lynching kind of policies, but there are policies that have provided supports for housing. Like the New Deal did not provide supports for most jobs held by Black people. Like it excluded domestic workers, it excluded agricultural workers. At the time, those were actually and still are primarily jobs held by people of color. And so we have policies that have supported white communities and intentionally not supported housing and other things for people of color. And I think part of the problem of how we've talked about racism in our country is that we have made it like either you're a Nazi or in the KKK or you're a liberal and you're not. And the reality is like our society is kind of founded on these things that are about racism and white supremacy. And I think it's so important for white organizations to take on the responsibility of addressing racism and addressing these structural things that prevent funding, prevent housing, the war on drugs, all these things that have really disproportionately hurt people of color. And it shouldn't be people of color who are the ones who are responsible for changing that. Like white-led organizations need to be stepping up to do a lot of that work.
I was going to say, to take off of that point as well, like we can see in the infrastructure of how nonprofit, the nonprofit industrial complex operates in our state and around, I think, in many parts of the country as well, where because there's more access to resources for white-led organizations, and because a lot of the folks who provide those resources often want there to be a focus in communities of color, you end up with a pattern of white-led work going into communities of color without drawing on the leadership, especially at the highest levels of that organization, of people who live in those communities. Which also, on the flip side, leaves an enormous gap in poor white communities where there isn't a lot of organizing happening outside of groups like the KKK and, you know, folks who you know, for example, like trying to get Donald Trump elected, like that there are certain folks who are going into those communities, and then there are folks who have probably more accurate answers to the questions that poor white people are asking about their economic situation that aren't there, that there isn't the support for them to be there. And if they were there, what would that look like, and what would it make possible for those folks to have answers to their questions that are not, well, that brown person over there did this to you,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, that leads into something that I wanted to ask you about, which is that, you know, the story that we tell about poverty is that you think of like the story of the 80s of the welfare mom, which was characterized as like a poor black woman who's mooching off the system, right? And this idea that like poverty is something that people choose, and I feel like Donald Trump is kind of reinvigorating this story about poverty again. Not that we've ever let it go, but it's like coming back stronger, which is that the idea that people just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, that if you're in poverty, it's because you're not working hard enough, and you know, it's your fault basically that you're in poverty. And in fact, that's not true at all. But I think that when I look at our state and these incredible concentrations of wealth in mostly white communities, and then we have poor rural communities that are white, mostly white, and then we have cities that are a mix of, some of them are primarily people of color, and where there's a lot of concentration of poverty and needs. I have this question of like, how do we change that story? Because to change policy and to change funding and all those things involves changing that story that we're telling about why people are in poverty. And maybe you don't see it that way, but I wanted to know what you think of that and how you think about addressing those like the root issues of how we're dealing with poverty, racial and economic inequity in our state.
Well, it sounds maybe a little cliche, but I think, you know, at the end of the day, you know, truth is more powerful than a lie. But the thing is uncovering the truth. And I think that's a challenge for white communities and communities of color, because we've all been fed this myth, right? This lie and racism is a huge lie. It's a huge myth, right? And so it takes a lot of work to even dig in to find the truth, that like all the roots of racism and everything that you're taught, everything that, you know, this population over here is inferior, this population over here is superior, and that kind of is messaged in a lot of different ways, is a lie, right? And the thing is, like, that lie goes back to the country's founding, and so, and we know this, but we kind of ignore this. So it takes that digging, right? And then I think being able to sit on the truth, and repel the lies, I think ultimately will win out, but it's going to take a movement like based in truth. And so I think, you know, while it's not, it shouldn't be incumbent upon communities of color to kind of going back to like a previous question, to you know, educate or move like white-led organizations to like recognize how that myth is manifesting in this organization, and then like undo that. Like that's a lot of work. You know, I think within communities of color, recognizing our own truth for the sake of our own being able to stand on our own humanity and humanity within our community, like, right, that also takes a lot of work. But once we find that, and once we can do the work with our community to find that and stand on that and remain on that, what will happen is when those myths of racism are perpetuated against us, we push them back. And then sort of what I see, and I think it's in large part of the next generation of organizing activists that are coming up, who, in large part, are standing on that truth, who have recognized their humanity and are pushing back, than a lot of the white allies, community members out there who have been perpetuating this myth subconsciously or consciously, really don't have a choice but to see the lie and make pretty much a conscious decision whether they want to unlearn that lie or they want to perpetuate it. And I think you can kind of see a clear shift. So when Donald Trump is running his campaign on bigotry and people are buying into that, like that, it's so clear, right? It's like a conscious decision. I'm going to like reanimate these lies. I'm gonna make America great. We're gonna go back to our racist history, and we're gonna try to like give some new life into this, because with this black president and all these conversations about equity and safe spaces, like this is not the direction we want to go into, right? So people are making a conscious decision to like perpetuate the myth, right? But then there's a lot of resistance. But I think in the middle, there's a lot of confusion as well.
Right. How to understand it.
Right.
And a lot of people
differently.
perpetuating it who aren't consciously aware, or sometimes willfully unconscious of that reality. I mean, I would agree with everything that you just said, and for me, it also comes down to power. In terms of changing the story, I think I agree with you said that the truth is going to win out in the end, and that's the foundation that you build your movement on. You build it on a foundation of truth. That's what keeps your movement together. Truth and community, and then you put your work into shifting that power by building communities of resistance around in our case around the state. That can stand up to the lies, but at the end of the day, personally, I struggle with the notion that folks who are where they are right now, who are not ready to either like move on a racial equity issue, or who are participating in perpetuating racial inequity, that conversation, is going to get them there alone. I think the conversation is really important, and at the end of the day, I think there has to be a simultaneous effort to challenge and shift power, so that part of the issue that we have around poverty in this state and in this country is the people who make policy about poverty like ain't never been poor, like ever, and as someone who has been, like, you can see that, like when you see people making policies, you go, these people don't know what they're talking about, they don't know what they're doing. So it's, how are we bringing people into the fold? And there are some people, the people generally who are making good policy, who either themselves have experienced poverty or who have made the effort to connect with folks who have.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like, how are we shifting power so that folks who have lived in poverty, who are living in poverty, also have access to be able to run for office, to be able to hold positions of power? Personally, I think that's really important. I think it's important that people get to represent their own experiences in the halls of power in our state and in our country.
Right. And it's interesting because I think when people listen to this who haven't thought about this before in this way, that I've been thinking about, like, let's not just preach to the converted, right? Like, let's talk to people. Part of this changing the story is that we need people who don't understand this to listen to this. Mm-hmm. Is that white people there are lots of working class white people who have gotten into political positions of power, and who use exactly the argument you just said. Mm-hmm. I came from a working class family. My parents worked in a factory. Right. I know what was hard of life down on the ground, and so I'm going to work to fight for the people, right? And the people meant, in most cases, white people. Mm-hmm. And the difference is that there are differences in poverty in Absolutely. Communities of color, and obstacles that exist for people of color. Because when you walk in, you can't just put on a suit and get rid of your skin color. When you walk, you could dress up, but you are still seen as a person of color. Mm-hmm. And so there are barriers that come just from being a person of color Absolutely. In poverty versus being a white person in poverty. And those barriers do have to do with policies and privileges and systems, mm-hmm. not just about pulling yourself up. And so,
yeah. No, when we talk about that issue, you bring up the issue of generational poverty and generational theft and exploitation, because in the poor white community, although like there is often generational poverty, there's often poverty that is that's serious. We have to also look at the ways in which communities of color have been and continue to be targeted by systems in this country that seek to extract wealth. Mm-hmm. So and white communities have been targeted by that too, but just the disproportional targeting of people of color, because I think often the folks who do that targeting bet on the fact that people won't care about it happening to people of color. People take it for granted that people of color are just poor, and that's how they should be. So.
Yeah. So I want you to give an example of that in 1 second, but we're just gonna let people know that they're listening to WNHH Radio 103.5 FM. This is the Table Underground. I'm your host, Tagan Engel, and we are talking with the founding members of CT Core Organize Now about working for racial justice in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kamal, can you give me an example of how people of color are targeted by systems that maybe people don't know about?
I mean, absolutely. There's so many examples. I think one, if you look at the way that the 2008 crash hit communities of color relative to white communities, with the way that people lost, the way that people of color were targeted by the predatory lending system, and then lost their homes, some homes that had been held for generations. So there was an incredible loss of property that happened that was disproportionately falling on, I know specifically Black communities, and I would imagine people of color more generally as well. And then, again, just to look at the criminal justice system and the way that police, have interacted with Black communities, the things like civil forfeiture, where if you're pulled over, and, it depends on where you are with the laws. I think in some places you don't even need to be convicted. You just need to be suspected for the police to basically just take whatever money you have on you, or take property from you that if they suspect that it's involved in the commission of a crime. And I know that the ACLU, I wish I had a better memory of what they're working on, but they had been working on some policies to change the civil forfeiture laws in this state. But that's one example. The example that I gave earlier about the way that people who are involved in the system have wealth extracted from them. And then not to mention the fact that, once you have a felony on your record, or once you have anything on your record, really, it becomes that much harder to get a job, to keep a job. And, I could go on and on, but there's many, many, many examples of this throughout our history. And that is not even to acknowledge the enormous debt that is owed to our people in terms of reparations, for slavery, for centuries of unpaid labor that our ancestors did, for the crimes, the violence, and the exploitation that happened to us during the era of post-Reconstruction, Jim Crow, looking back at places like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where a Black community started to put something together that started to build wealth collectively, and white folks from the surrounding area came in and burned it to the ground and killed people, and all of that gone. So there's a long history, an incredibly long history, and that's why when I say generational poverty, like it's deep.
Right. And I think we don't talk enough about the generational wealth sometimes too, that a lot of the wealth that's concentrated in white families came from profiting off of having free labor on plantations. And whether it was people in this country or people in Europe who also were profiting off of slavery, although it often was from abroad, right? Like many countries in Europe were colonizing all parts of Africa, India, other places where they were still profiting off of slavery in different ways. That concentration of wealth, when we talk about reparations, it's not just an abstract thing. Like that wealth came from somewhere. You've mentioned a few of the challenges of doing this work, but are there any other things that you want to share around what some of the obstacles or challenges are to creating the movement that you're trying to build?
I mean, the obstacles are very similar to the obstacles that were put in place in the beginning, intentionally. We're here sitting as a couple, and organizers of an organization is talking about building Black power, building Black institutions, and it's 2017. This country is more than 200 years old, and we're still trying to build institutions and power for a population that has been here since the beginning, since before the beginning. And so as we're getting our footing on a foundation of truth, and trying to build up from that foundation, those obstacles that have been in place for centuries still exist. And we find ourselves in 2017 in New Haven, Connecticut, in the month of June, pushing up against centuries-old
Right, the same stuff.
obstacles,
Yeah.
and so it's extremely challenging.
Yeah.
Um,
What are some of the things that really help to sustain you in this work? 'Cause I think it's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
It's
Oh, yeah.
really hard work, emotionally, physically,
Yeah.
everything. What are some of the things that sustain you? I mean, you guys have kids too.
Right.
You have a family.
Yeah, I would say that speaks to like the intentionality of why we set our work up the way that we did, with the 3 pillars of community organizing, training, and community building. And we try to run community building through everything that we do. So our organizing work is like generally, just bringing people together around specific issues to build campaigns, take action, and change policy. Our training work is something that we provide to prepare leaders to do racial justice work around the state. And there's different trainings that we offer and will be offering. And then the final piece, this community building piece, is really, I think, the thing that sustains the work and helps to sustain us as well, which is, it's sometimes a little hard to describe, but it's really about a specific approach to how we work and the kinds of spaces that we create that are, one, I would say, welcoming and affirming to everyone, which speaks to the kind of world that we want to live in. And we're trying to, as we do this work, also try to create that world within our work, so that it permeates everything that we do. So there's that piece, and just
So can you talk a little, like, what do you feel like you do to create that welcoming community?
Well, yeah, I think, one thing that we tried at a recent meeting that was really nice was having childcare. I mean, we always try to have childcare for meetings, but having childcare that was actually in the room when we were doing work. So there were actually children walking through the meeting. In this case, it was our kids, and they were having a great time. But just like not feeling like we necessarily need to separate people. I think also being really intentional about intergenerational organizing in general. So making sure that we're reaching out to young people, reaching out to elders, and everybody in between, and building those bonds. So it's hard to say because it runs through every part of our work, so it looks different in different places. But I would also say just the way that we're working on building a network with other organizations and individuals that are committed to doing this work, especially people of color-led work and Black-led work, and the beautiful thing about that is that there does exist in this state a number of organizations that have been hanging in spite of all of the challenges and all of the barriers and doing incredible work. Oftentimes, really under-resourced, which I think we need to start, pushing the people who are holding resources and supporting work to really take another look at these initiatives. They're often under-resourced, but are still able to do incredible work. And we've been overwhelmed with the strength of our relationships and the way that people have come around what we're doing and invited us to come around what they're doing. So we move a lot in collaboration and partnership as well, which also, I would say, to speak to the sustainability piece, creates a way in which we can share our power bases and bring that together and share skills. Like some people understand things I don't understand, like about social media or how to do civil disobedience or how to connect to this community or how to reach out and get information quickly about certain issues. So we're able to like plug in with each other's networks and say, okay, well, CT Core can mobilize these relationships in this organization. We work a lot with people against police brutality in New Haven, so they can mobilize certain relationships and they can bring a certain expertise and understanding to the work. So that's a really important part of how we move as well, and that's also centered in building a community of action, a community of leadership that is, we are deeply invested in the growth and the development of those organizations as well as the development of our own.
Yeah, that's great. I know that you have a number of campaigns going on and issues that you're working on, and people often think about like criminal justice reform and education and economic equity as these pieces that are very more obvious places where there's racial and economic disparity. And I notice in your platform that you also have environmental justice and health inequity as an issue, which is not always there, especially in people of color-led work, although it's becoming more and more so, especially as Black farmers. There's more and more Black farmers who are saying, hey, we need to have land, we need to mobilize, these are important issues. But I'd love to hear you talk about why those, both environmental justice and health equity, are part of your core platform and what that looks like.
Yeah, and in the beginning, I think uh, part of like the impetus behind CT Core, and what I was speaking to earlier about like the need for more Black leadership. Um, there was a need. There were some gaps, right? And part of those gaps was need for Black leadership and moving racial justice issues. And I think the impetus in the beginning was very criminal justice reform heavy. There have been like a lot of initiatives currently still, some initiated by the governor, um, and others initiated by others, like at the state level, that are looking at different criminal justice reform measures. Very few of them are led by either people of color, Black people, and where
The ones who are
disproportionately affected
yeah.
by the criminal
Yeah.
justice system, or people who have been previously incarcerated or have had interactions with the criminal justice system. It's just like by definition, you can't have equity that way. But like as I started to think about trying to bring about systemic change, it just became impossible to think about just criminal justice reform, and that and thinking about like the broader like organizing infrastructure needs to ultimately eliminate all systemic inequities in our state. That there was going to have to be a broader scope, and I think personally I've been involved in some environmental justice issues, living and organizing in Bridgeport. There's a lot of polluting industry in Bridgeport. I worked at the Bridgeport Health Department for about 6 years. And so my mom's a nurse, I was a medic in the U.S. Army. And so, issues, maybe not necessarily systemic inequity, but issues that are always important to me. And then doing the work is at the health department while also kind of doing my organizing thing on the side. Started to see opportunities to like address it at the systemic level. And so I think a lot of it was just personal experience and the need to have like a broad systemic focus around equity. But since forming CORE, food justice has become a priority for CT CORE. The initial kind of touch with food justice is more through an economic justice framework, but since it's risen up and I've become more educated and we've been involved in more networks, absolutely the connection to the environment and health is very prominent.
Yeah. So when you say like you started out with as an economic piece, do you mean like around hunger? Or
around more self-determination. And so again, going back to Bridgeport, where there are food apartheid like communities where through decisions made by the political structures, there are communities that are shut out from affordable, healthy food. And after enduring that for decades, I came in contact with some community members last spring who were trying to figure out how to remedy this themselves. And so I saw that initially as an important economic campaign. To be honest, I wasn't even thinking about the access to food piece. I was like, yeah, the community should be controlling these markets. And food justice is still very much rooted for us in economics. But having an opportunity to kind of walk through the door of food system change and how the food system does not work, and my eyes being open to that, absolutely the health and the environment piece has become more prominent.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, food is an economic system, right?
Absolutely.
Like agriculture. I mean, think about slavery. Like we are
sure.
an agriculturally founded country when the colonizers came, and so food is an economic system.
Yeah, and the racial justice issue.
Yeah,
sure.
and the environmental things you mentioned, like the pollution, it doesn't tend to be in white wealthy areas, right? It tends to be in poor communities and in communities of color. And so those are racial and economic issues and need solutions that pay attention to all of those things.
Absolutely.
So we're getting towards the end of our interview, but I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to share about work that you have coming up, ways that people can get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So one big thing we're hoping everybody will mark their calendars, it's tomorrow, and get ready for is a Black Lives Matter rally that we're having tomorrow at 1 p.m. in Waterbury with People Against Police Brutality, Moral Monday Connecticut, and Black Lives Matter New Haven. This is in response to a really unacceptable wave of violence from police forces across the state. We've had 4 deaths in the state since January as a result of police violence, and many of these were high-speed chases, which are illegal chases that have happened that have ended people's lives in the last few months and over the last, really, it goes back as far as anybody can look. So we're having that rally tomorrow at Hayden Park, 250 Grove Street in Waterbury. We also have a police.
That's Saturday, June 17th.
Saturday, June 17th. It's tomorrow. We also have a police accountability meeting. We're going to be planning more of our work around accountability in Bridgeport Thursday at 6 p.m. So we're hoping people will come to that, especially folks in Bridgeport. And finally, I would say just, people want to go on our website, www.ctcore-organizenow.org. And you can sign up on our mailing list. You can become a member. We do have a dues structure, but we ask people to pay what they can. And then also for anybody who wants to contribute to our work, we hope that people will consider making donations. People can send checks made out to our fiscal sponsor, A Better Way Foundation, to P.O. Box 8897, New Haven, Connecticut 06532.
And I listed all this stuff on thetableunderground.com, so if people go to thetableunderground.com, there's a link to your website, and people can get information about the events and organizing.
Yes, you can also make donations online if you go and follow the link to our website, so I hope people will support.
On a Facebook page and an events page on our website.
And we're on Twitter.
Great, you got it covered. And is the work open to anybody? I know you're trying to focus on leadership of people of color, but if there are white people that want to join and support, is that are people welcome?
Yeah, our work is open to anybody that wants to get involved. We do maintain some spaces that are safe spaces for people of color, for Black people, and like you said, we center the leadership of Black people in our organization. But we welcome people who want to come in the spirit of solidarity. And we welcome connections with everybody that's here for racial justice.
Yeah, great. And I had been planning to bring some food to you guys because I love feeding people, as you know. But I remember that we are still in Ramadan, and I know you said that you observe Ramadan, and so I brought you some things that I'm going to give to you. If people go to thetableunderground.com, there is a post up there about summertime thirst quenchers. I know it got cold today, but it's been like 90 something degrees every day, and we're heading into summer. And so this is a passion fruit drink, because I think you guys could probably use. I know you got a lot of passion, but I want some more love passion for you. And it has some local strawberries. So we got our passion, our love, in there, and some local food. And then as another little treat, I've been experimenting with sprouting, and I thought, so much of what you're doing is you're growing new things, right? You're building on this amazing history and history of activism, and that you're sprouting new things and growing new things and bringing life. And so I wanted to give you some living food, which are these sprouts, and they're from my first experiment, which I will be posting some info up on the website as well. But those are beautiful. Yeah. So people can go to thetableunderground.com to find recipes, and they can listen to the Love Bad show where we were mixing them on the radio. But I just wanted to give you guys a little love.
Thank you so much.
Not eat them now. You can eat them tonight or early tomorrow morning. So thank you guys so much for joining. It was great to have you.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the hard work you're doing. Yeah. Take care. Good. Awesome. I didn't ask you about how your spiritual practice informed. I didn't want us to get, but how did that feel to you guys?
Good.
Yeah? Good. Thank you for sharing all that.
Deeper than a lot of interviews I've done so far.
Yeah.
About our work. People ask us a little bit about our work, but it's not to the depth of what the issues are and how they affect people differently.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, that's sort of the intention. I suppose to get to talk a lot about we do this campaign and that thing, and I want to Good.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Do you want to take these because I'm going to hang out downtown?
Thank you.
Or I can drop here. Why don't you take this bag?
Yeah?
Yeah, it's mine. I have a million little bags.
I think we still have one of your
Oh, wait.
plates.
We do.
It's
Maybe
okay.
a couple plates.
It's not a problem. I used to do catering, and so I have like kind of a stock of too many
Mhm.
plates and things. I do not buy any more plates ever, but from when I do catering, I kind of have some surplus stuff. So
All right, cool.
awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
I know I didn't ask you like to say how does it